You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. Well, we're watching the game on Saturday, and with about 11 minutes to play in the ball game, we all saw it. UCLA facing a 3rd and 35. They complete a short pass over the middle. Harold Perkins Jr. closed, laid a big hit, and buckled. Went to the ground. Initially, it looked like he reached for his back, which was so odd. But it was clear on the field. They were looking at his right knee. He limped off, limped to the locker room, was seen leaving Tiger Stadium on crutches and with a brace on his leg. And the initial reports that we got on Saturday evening were not good, that they were fearing the worst. Imaging done on Sunday confirmed what I think they all feared. And that's what Brian Kelly said on Monday when he led off his press conference.
Harold Perkins will be lost for the season with a significant knee injury. We're not certain about the specifics relative to time and place for surgery, but it looks to be, an ACL injury. And certainly an injury that, we feel terrible about, especially for Harold and, the work that he's done to put himself in a great position.
That's the part of this that sucks the most. We're going to talk about what this means for LSU defensively, but short, long-term, Harold Perkins' future, all that, because it's part of it. But in the same vein, when we talked about John Emery, all the perseverance that he had gone through into his 6th year of college, and to be struck with another torn ACL, it's just miserable. It's gutting. Jacobian Guillory, a guy who, by his own admission, had to mature a lot throughout his LSU career, and now in this position as a 5th-year player, was poised to be an every-down player on the interior, really the rock, the center of that defensive line. And boom, in his 2nd game of his senior year, ruptured Achilles, done for the season. And now, week 4, it's Harold Perkins. I mean, you played 4 games and you've had 3 season-ending injuries to veteran players, 2 of them on the defensive side that are key players for your defense. You're gutted for Harold Perkins, a young guy who was so ballyhooed, splashed onto the scene as a freshman. We all know that. Last year, I've made this point while many people have tried to minimize his impact. Harold Perkins was all over the field a year ago. His impact just wasn't felt because the defense was so bad. 5.5 sacks, 13 TFLs. I mean, he was everywhere. I mean, he had an interception against Missouri. He blocked a field goal against Missouri. He changed games at times a year ago. It's just that defense was so bad that even when he was making impact plays, it just went unnoticed. And then through the first 4 games here this year, it was very much on par with what we'd seen from Harold in the way that he could impact a game, even though if it wasn't necessarily stuffing the stat sheet. As a matter of fact, when Brian Kelly was asked about that, he was asked, what are you losing in Harold Perkins? That's kind of what he said.
You got to pay attention to him, right? So from an offensive standpoint, you got to know where he is so you're game planning against a guy that can wreck your day. So you lose that piece right away. But, our players clearly understand in this game that you're going to get injuries. And so we're not going to lose, our identity or fall apart because of it. But I think from the other side, I think people would see it as well. They lost a huge piece of their defense, and he is a great player. But there's 10 other players that make that thing happen. And I think it really helps now that our guys understand all 11 have to work harder and have to work together to be the kind of defense we want to be.
We'll see. I don't know that you lose a player like Harold Perkins and just get over it. Some of you are sarcastically rolling your eyes because the production on the stat sheet isn't there. But you heard what Brian Kelly said there at the beginning of that. Opponents have to game plan for him because he can wreck your day. When he's on the field, he makes you be aware of where number 7 is. I was reminded of this. It jolted right into my mind. Dave Aranda, who we all agree is a brilliant defensive coordinator, before the 2017 season, I remember we were talking to Dave Aranda in the fifth floor at the LSU Athletic Administration building. It was after he signed his contract. He signed a contract extension. And Dave Aranda was asked about Arden Key. And Key, as a junior as a sophomore in 2016, had a dozen sacks. He was awesome. Now, he was coming off injury. Remember, he had the shoulder surgery. But that summer, before 2017, we asked Dave Aranda about Arden Key, and this is what he said.
I think if we've got Arden, we're going to, anytime we have him, we're going to feature him. And we're going to try to get matchups with him and move him around. And then I think at times things may be a little bit more simple because Arden can change the math for us.
He changes the math for us. It was a very brilliant way to say it. Because if Arden Key's on the field, offensively, they had to commit multiple guys to making sure Arden Key didn't wreck your day. Look, you want to go back to Arden Key's sophomore year in 2016, 15 TFLs, a dozen sacks, 3 forced fumbles. He could wreck your day. As a junior, now he only played in 8 games because he was coming off the shoulder injury. But he had 4 sacks and 6 TFLs, just 1 forced fumble. Teams overcommitted to making sure he didn't wreck their day. They saw where 49 was and went the other way. Similar with Perkins. Even if it's not on the stat sheet, he's impacting the game maybe in ways that you don't even necessarily see. And when you look at how Pro Football Focus graded Harold Perkins, it's pretty consistent. 67 against Southern Cal, 53, 60, 59. Consistent. You know, the pass rush grade is what we all wanted to see. His pass rush grade was a 72 against South Carolina. It was very good. The tackling grade is what we saw bring Harold Perkins' total grade down because, quite honestly, he struggled to tackle in space. He's a guy that can run you down, but breaking down in space, we saw him miss tackles, and that was a weak spot in his game, something he'll have to work on. But like Dave Aranda said about Arden Key, Brian Kelly said about Harold Perkins, he changes the math when an offense has to account for him. Now you take that away. So for LSU now, there's a very practical question of what do you do with Harold Perkins no longer on the field? And I asked Brian Kelly about the personnel and kind of how they move things with Perkins no longer there.
Look, if we want to play with 3 linebackers on the field, the first guy that would move out there would be Whit Weeks. He would play that Sam linebacker position. West Weeks would move to the Mike linebacker, and Greg Penn would play the Will. So if we wanted to be in Buffalo, we feel like we're still in a really good position. We would probably activate Xavier Atkins as the next Will in that kind of situation. So that's where we would be if we wanted to stay in the configuration that we were currently in last weekend. We would probably look at also going back into a star position with Major Burns playing the star, backed up by Kylan Jackson. That would be the other kind of look that we would have. So we have the versatility to be in either one of those defensive structures.
You do, but none of the players that you just mentioned is Harold Perkins. Because you don't have a guy that is athletic enough and gifted enough to rush the passer that can also drop in coverage and cover a back or a tight end and impact the game that way. You don't have that guy on the roster. There isn't another one. So if that means moving Major Burns to the star and then having Gilbert Sage Ryan at safety, you're better with Harold Perkins at star than you are with Major Burns at star. If, as he mentioned, you're going Buffalo and Witt goes to Will and West is at Mike and Greg Penn's at Sam, you're not as good as you would be if you had Harold Perkins, Whit Weeks, Greg Penn all on the field together. It's not to say you can't be serviceable, but you're not as good when you have to go into your depth. There's a reason starters are starters and backups are backups. So this is impactful. It's a very, and I know where fans fall on this. Fans are perplexed by how Perkins had such an incredible freshman season, and seemingly his impact has been mitigated since. I understand exactly where fans come from. But you trust the coaches when they tell you the impact that he has is felt in a lot of different ways. Because we watch the ball, we don't always watch what else is happening to influence what's happening with the ball. Then there's the question of Harold Perkins' future. And Brian Kelly was asked about that, about his potential draft decision, and he said clearly that's not even being thought of right now.
Oh, I don't think any of those decisions are made. Way too soon for him to, or his family, to have made any kind of declaration whether this is his last game or not. I think they're just trying to get a hold of the surgery and the rehab associated with it. He'll take all that into consideration, and then when it's time to make a decision, he'll make a decision. Certainly he has plenty of time before he has to make that decision.
There's a couple of things to consider. He'll certainly get feedback from the NFL, but it's also worth noting this injury happened so early that if you're just thinking in terms of combine and pro day, if Harold Perkins has that surgery this week, I mean, he'd have October, November, December, January. He'd have 4 months to rehab before combine, and even more than that before pro day, if he wanted to go that route. I'm not saying you'd be full speed 100%, but we've seen guys, I mean, Willis McGahee famously comes to mind, was injured in that Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State in January, and then still was a first-round pick that spring. It can happen, and ACLs aren't now what they were. It's really going to be a matter of, does Harold Perkins think by coming back he could boost his draft stock, or is he going to be where he is, slotted according to NFL teams and personnel decisions? Could NIL play a factor in it for him coming back for another year? Potentially. But it's also worth noting, if you're a first-round pick, teams have a fifth-year option. If you go outside of year one, you hit free agency after year 4. So in theory, you'd even get extended after year 3. So you start your NFL clock ticking earlier. There's a lot of different things that'll factor into that decision that Harold Perkins will ultimately have to make. But from an LSU perspective, you wish him the best. Love to see him get healthy, come back for an awesome year next year. But does he want to take that risk? We'd understand it either way. But LSU without Harold Perkins confirmed torn ACL. This season is over. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.